Hello, and welcome to the Natural State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. It is my belief that the natural state of any living organism is health, and that our artificial habitat has forced us into having artificial health problems. This show is my attempt to dive deep and learn about using nutrition, sleep, movement, relationships, and more to help you reclaim your natural state of health in a modern world and show you how to thrive in an environment that's stacked against you. If you enjoyed today's show, you can find out more details and information at dranthonygustin.com. Today, I have my friend Brian Sanders joining me on the podcast. Brian is one of these people who does not give a shit about what other people think and calls it the food industry for what it is. And because of that, him and I get along very, very well. If you watch any of my videos, listen to my podcasts, or read my newsletters at The Feed, dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. I go on health rants almost every single time about how messed up our food system is and what we need to do to fix it. And Brian's one of the only other people who sort of share that same sentiment. So we sort of dive in today about the food system problems, why we are where we are, and how to get out of it. So there's a lot of actionable stuff in here, some rants, but we get into it. Great conversation. Love Brian and all the work he's doing, and I hope you guys enjoy the show. This episode of The Natural State is sponsored by Ned. Ned is an incredible company that makes a lot of CBD products, and you guys can probably go back to some of my episodes and realize that I have been a CBD skeptic for a very long time. I think that it's really hard in this industry that's exploding to have really high quality products that actually do anything. I tried a bunch of different CBD brands before this one, and unless they had THC in them as well, not enough to get high, but just enough to amplify the effects of CBD, I didn't feel anything until I tried Ned and then was completely blown away. I'd been using their products before they sponsored the show for about 4 to 6 months and have noticed a huge increase the nights that I use their product, about 25 milligrams, so 50 milligrams per night of the CBD. And I sleep way better. But then also the most interesting part is my HRV, as tracked by my Oura Ring, the next morning is about 20 points higher the day that I use CBD versus not. I also have not been doing a lot of social drinking as of this year. So anybody who's been following my stuff knows that I've sort of been taking the backseat to any sort of glass of wine here, drink there, to take the edge off. And the last few months, I'm sure everybody in the world feels a little stressed out. And I've been doing the same amount, like 25 to 50 milligrams, to sort of replace that glass of wine, to wind down and de-stress. And it's been pretty remarkable to pull down the edge and make sure that I can just like calm down at night with all that's going on in the world. The founders are amazing people. They really care about their supply chain, their sourcing. They do things the right way. And I asked them to hook you guys up with a little bit of a discount code. So if you want to try Ned out, just go to helloned.com/AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. That's HELLONED.com/AG15. That's AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. This show is also brought to you by Blue Blocks, blue light blocking glasses. Blue light is one of these things that a lot of people do not realize is completely trashing their sleep. So this is verified, at least for me. I looked at my Oura Ring, and anytime I get blue light exposure from devices past, say, 4 p.m., the latency, the time it takes for me to fall asleep, as well as my deep sleep, are completely diminished. And when I wear glasses like Blue Blocks, it completely reverses that, and I can get a full rested sleep with no problem. There are a lot of brands out there right now that are trying to get on this trend of blocking blue light for good reason. And what happens is most of them are either really cheap and they break super easily, they are terrible looking and make you look like a freaking goon, or they actually just don't work. So I've tried some out that, are sort of a spectrum of any of these things, all the way to being so dark that I get headaches from wearing them. And what I like about Blue Blocks is it sort of addresses all of these things. So they're made actually in Australia, really, really high quality stuff. They have 20 plus different styles of each one. So no matter what sort of style fits your head and your face, my face is sometimes a little tough to make look good. So I'm glad they have options for me. But also they test all of their lenses to make sure that they meet specific criteria to block very specific wavelengths of light. And this is the important part here. Not a lot of brands do this. And so I've actually tested their side by side. I mean, you can do this as easily as just looking at a spectrum of blue, and you put on their glasses and you can't see the blue anymore. It goes completely black or it has a shade of a gray. And this is what you want. And these guys who have done this company have done a phenomenal job at really sourcing the highest quality lenses, highest quality frames, and the ones that actually look good. So I'm not embarrassed when I put these on in public. And I asked them if they could hook you guys up, and they obliged. So 15% off is yours if you use code AG15. Also, you get free shipping. So if you want to, just head to BLUBLOX.com and use code AG15. That's blueblocks.com. Use code AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. Brian, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, man, Anthony, good things. Good times we got this going.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a lot of scheduling errors, but here we are ready to chat. You've been one of my favorite people to follow online, just watching all the stuff you put out. My life is too busy right now to do all the hard work of actually educating people on how messed up our food system is. And you have done a lot. I mean, all of your stuff, your memes you put out, like everything is just not only hilarious, but just so educational. And most people just don't talk about this stuff. So happy to dig in and get after it.
Well, yeah, thanks. I kind of took after Dr. Ted Naiman. I think he inspired me. People should know who that is. He does great memes and stuff. And I have little graphic design skills and I just love putting together information. I have these ideas. I'm like, how am I going to get this out to people? And I'm glad it's useful.
So we were chatting a little bit before the show about just, man, how everything's stacked against us as far as just trying to be healthy and trying to be normal. And just curious, like when it switched for you and you went to, this is obviously what's going on here. Like everything's messed up and it's my job to help educate people about this. Like what was the turning point for you personally?
Well, it's funny. It seems like weird that I just had to take it upon myself to do it. I mean, it's kind of like this sort of, I don't know, not braggy thing to do, but just, well, what happened to me is my parents, my family grew up, we were doing all the right things. We were eating the good foods. We weren't going out to eat. We weren't, eating soda, McDonald's, all that stuff. We were just cooking our foods, following the food pyramid, and it didn't serve them. They got sick. I lost my parents at 30 to just jump straight into it. Like I'm 30, they're gone. They had these chronic diseases. We normalize them. We think it's normal for people to just get all these things, Alzheimer's, cancers, type 2 diabetes. And it was just sad for me because they did all the right things. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was 30. That's when you kind of stop being able to eat whatever you want anymore. And, and I was like the in shape guy in my group. And then I'm looking back, I was like, I lost 4 pant sizes since then. Like I wore the 32 board shorts. Now I wear 28 board shorts. And I had like a terrible body composition back then, but I was the in shape guy because that's the state of our society. And it just took my friend showing me Mark Sisson's book, really. Like I'll credit Mark Sisson, the Primal Blueprint. And I was just like, this is opposite of what I thought. And a couple of their friends were doing it and they were like, pounds were melting away. They didn't look like all our other 30-year-old friends that were dad bods and round faces. And that was about 7 years ago, and just been really on this path since.
Got it. So lost your parents to chronic diseases. Is it like sort of a deep dive after that? Like, oh shit, I need to be healthy. Let's look at it for myself. Or was it more of an inquisition around how did this happen and why did we were doing what we were supposed to, like, why is this the case?
No, yeah, it was actually a slow process. Yeah, I didn't dive straight into it like that. I was just kind of like, just doing my thing. Like, this guy's getting in better shape. And it slowly put the puzzle pieces together. I think a lot of people with all things, you can't force something upon them. They have to be ready for it, right? You can't just like, this is what the deal is. Like you have to kind of discover it for yourself. So that's the process, is discovering it for myself. And I was like, I stopped eating bread. And then all of a sudden I feel way better. And, I'm not tired, So I think for a lot of people, you have to go on the self journey and you can't just slam into it.
So the first step was sort of a paleo-ish template. Is that kind of what got you on this track?
Yeah. Just like the whole primal blueprint, man. And I would just gradually go down. And then my friend was like, just keto, man, like, 5 years ago, he's like, just try it. Just like go all in. And I was like, no, man, I'm doing so good. Like, don't worry about it. And then, I just kept reading, kept learning, and finally tried it. And it is kind of a hard dive. Thinking back, I'm like thinking that anyone can just do it, but you again, you have to be ready. You have to know why you're doing it. And you can't just, someone can just tell you, just do this, and then it just automatically works.
Right. And so at what point were you motivated to start putting out your own content, synthesizing all this stuff and getting it to people?
Well, so this was 3 years ago. It was in the summer of 3 years ago. I saw What the Health, and I also was getting back into film stuff. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I did that for years. I got into tech, but I grew up doing film stuff, and my friend continued on, and he's the one I'm making the film with now. So I was getting back into film in the Hollywood, scene, just doing little sketch comedy, stuff like that. And I was like, man, I could make a film. Why can't I? Like, I've discovered all this stuff. I've changed my health. My parents, I'm sort of bitter because of what happened to them, right? I'm like, we had the wrong info. Saw What the Health, they're just spouting out anti-meat activists, sort of vegan propaganda type stuff. And I got mad, and I made a website, and I started calling up people. I was like, got on the horn with Ted Naiman and Nina Teicholz. So it's like, you guys are doing great work. Like, would you be in this film? And they said yes. And then from there, it's a slow process. So I just jumped online and started doing other content as I, did the slow process of the film.
And then did you just quit your job and said, screw it, I'm going all in, or how?
Kinda, yeah. It was this kind of time where I had, part of my story is I actually had overuse injuries. So I was working on the computer doing engineering work, and I was inflamed. I was eating, this food pyramid diet. It's actually inflaming my wrist more. Stopped eating that way. My wrist got better. I could use the computer more. But I could have gotten another job, but I didn't. And I decided to just go all in with this. So I had money saved from the tech world. And yes, I just decided to go on my own and figure it out as I go.
Yeah. I mean, hell of a journey, huh?
I mean, it's crazy. Some people thought it was crazy, but I was always the guy, like, I just couldn't work for someone else. I was just like, I need to find my own path. And this nutrition stuff, it's like, I feel like I spent my whole life trying to find what I needed to do. And this found me.
Yeah. I mean, it's like one of these things where I think even when people are trying to make big behavior shifts, you've referenced it a couple of times, that it's really challenging to shift your mindset. You have to be ready for it. And I think that changing your career is sort of like that as well. I mean, what were some of the things that, was it tough, or were you so motivated by it that it wasn't even an option?
I guess I was just used to that, just making my own way and figuring it out. Or it's also a skill to learn how to live cheaply, right? Like, I was making good money in tech and pretending I had a minimum wage job. And so I think that's a good life skill to have, is how do I live cheaply? And then just gaining life skills. I just picked up graphic design. I designed websites. I did that's nothing like engineering. Like, it's not, people think that they're related. Tech and engineering were nothing alike, but I just kept trying to pick up skill sets that ultimately would, help me. So
yeah,
there's some solicited advice for people.
Yeah. I mean, just the ability to learn and be a beginner is a huge one too, that a lot of people aren't, especially if you have success. Like, I'm sure you were pretty good at your job before, and get so entrenched in doing something, to start over from complete scratch, even though resources to learn about anything right now are so abundant. I mean, I'm doing it all the time. I'm getting a farm, and I'm like, okay, I don't know how to raise an animal. I don't know how to grow crops. What the hell am I doing? But like, to be able to jump into that, and I've done that historically over my whole life. I feel like I've had 15 different careers in the last 6 years. That, that's always been really fun for me, but also really intimidating. And it never really gets easier, but you just get used to it, I think.
Well, I think that's one of the best skills to have that I'd recommend to people. Is, I think there are kind of kinds of people in the world. Some people just like to do the job, and they just go to their work and they do it, and that's fine if you like it. But if you have this curiosity, it's not scary. I think I've talked to friends, and it's so scary. They're like, are you crazy? You're just going to make a film. You're just going to not work. It's like, no, this stuff is exciting for some people. Or you just make your own way. It's like getting out of your own way. Like, you're saying there's so many resources these days, so anyone can do it. And I agree, anyone can do it. It's just some people are scared to take the leap. Totally.
And so you've developed a bunch of different frameworks on how you think about health and how, we should be healthy. So, so sapient concept's one of them. So just curious in your general take on synthesizing all this information. I mean, I think that anyone who's usually an engineer before that they think about health are my favorite people. So like you, Ted, Dave Feldman, like these cats who like think about
Ivor
things.
Cummins.
Yeah, 100%. So like people who shift from that mindset into, or just like trying to understand how things actually work instead of just memorizing stuff in a medical school textbook are way better thinkers about why we're actually in this process and how to get out of it. So curious as far as how you think about this framework and how to approach it in a really simple way.
Yeah, that's what I think my only contribution is, really, because I'm not the doctor, I'm not the scientist, nutrition researcher, but I love looking at root cause stuff. That's what, Ivor and Dave and Ted, they're always talking about the root cause of things. And that's how we should be looking at medicine. And yeah, I had the, good fortune of interviewing over 150 people so far, and really world's famous, super smart, amazing people. And yeah, I've kind of tried to get this all into the film. I kind of just rewrote the whole film in the past few months. And we had to slow down a little bit from lockdowns, and we're still trying to film some stuff, and it's taking forever. And everyone's like, when are you going to finish the film? But I'm saying, hey, this is going to be the best thing ever. We're going to get so many concepts. It's going to be so good. We could get into the film stuff later, but what we're trying to do with the film is give an audiovisual way for everyone, the random person in Ohio or Kentucky, get them to figure out that food matters, that their health matters, that they're going to get sick down the road if they don't start focusing on this, that just even that, and then just get them to know that they were lied to or that we had some wrong recommendations, and then just give these high level concepts of how to change their health and how to move towards health. And so out of all this, out of all the people I've interviewed, things I've listened to, I try to listen to both sides. That's another thing. I kind of started out going down one path. I was like, keto and low carb is so awesome. Like, this is the only way to go. And I was like, oh no, there's much more to this. And that both, I started discovering how both sides of nutrition can work. And I think that helped get a overall framework of nutrition or unifying theory, and called it the Sapient Framework. But it's basically one concept I think is really interesting is the level of processing almost is all that matters about food. And that if you make your diet up of just foods in the least altered form, you will be healthier. It's almost a linear scale. And, I don't know if this is sort of rude or something, but you could look at a overweight person that carries a lot of extra fat, and I could say, like, it's almost like linear how much more processed foods they've eaten to get there. You can look at a thin person and you don't necessarily know, because maybe they work out a lot, or maybe they have good genes, or maybe they eat less and they are hungry all the time, but they remain thin. But my understanding is that you can't really get very obese without eating a high amount of these processed foods. And when you go down from there, it gets into satiety. I'm super interested in that kind of thing, and why foods aren't satiating. So no one wants to get fat, right? No one wants to overeat. Like, how do you get fat? You overeat energy, right? And so why do you overeat energy than what you need? Well, it's the food you're eating. It's not satiating, and you're driven to eat more over the long term. And people can override this in the short term and do any number of crash diets, and you can lose weight. But that doesn't mean it's long term. Long term, you need to make a food choice change and move towards more unprocessed foods, more whole foods. And that's where the satiety piece kind of comes into play. And you could get into the details of this. And, I had a guy on, Gabor Erdosi, who gets into like the GLP-1 and the peptides and all these different things that happen when you process foods down, especially plant foods, and how they interact with your body. And then these incretins, and, they create more insulin, and, insulin resistance is kind of the root of a lot of things. So you could look at these details, but when it comes down to it, it really is about the level of processing, about the satiety, and what works long-term is to eat foods that keep you full. So that's one thing. That's one concept that I just went down this little rabbit hole. So
basically eat foods that keep you full. I think that this is always sort of what I think as well regarding food, is like, Okay, plant-based, carnivore, the spectrum right now, keto, not keto, high carb, low carb, whatever. I sort of just say, like, I don't give a shit. Are you eating real food or not? Because this whole real food. But even that concept for a lot of people is really challenging to understand in 2020 what real food is. Like we had just created a system of acquiring food that looks nothing like how we would have, even 100 years ago. Like the advent of a supermarket just places such a weird concept on what food is. And people are so removed from food. And so when you say whole food, real food, and people are loading their plate up with an organic, whatever tomato sauce that's poured on top of organic whole grain pasta and eating that with no protein source, it's like that to me is like not whole food, real food. It's like sort of you have this weird spectrum of what's packaged, what's not packaged. And I'm sort of like trying to reframe how I communicate about this. And I think that a way that's much easier is just 2 words, just eat local. And the concept to flesh a little bit more is like, do you know who grew the food you're eating? Mm-hmm. Or even if you're eating packaged food, I don't care. Who packaged your food? Can you go and see that? Can you go see where they took it out of the ground? Can you see where they milled the flour to make the pasta? And if you get closer to that spectrum, whatever, I don't care if you're eating pasta. Like that's totally fine. But the concept of, can you go and actually meet the people that are producing your food? And if the answer is yes, you're likely not going to have any health problems or any serious ones to that degree. Like, yes, you can always optimize. And I know that sort of the carnivore crowd is big on trying to be the best you can be and whatever. But in general, like, this is not the fight that we're fighting in this country. The amount of sick people is insane. And we do not need to have everybody eating only meat or only plant-based, whatever. We need to have people eating locally and eating real foods. And I think that's a different paradigm around, like, how do you think about, in general, how people should be thinking about the term whole food, real food?
Yeah, that's a big concept that, again, we're laying this on the film, because you're right on with that. Is because I talk to so many people, right? This is all I do. You do a lot of this too. You're in the nutrition space, but for 3 years, all I do, every conversation seems to revolve around food, and I'm feeling people out, just like hearing their point of view, all this type of stuff. And you're completely correct. I know a lady that thinks if it exists in Whole Foods, the grocery store, it is good. Like she doesn't, it's like, oh, that's good. That's good. 100% good. And so we need to tease this out. And we were using that example of the Preventable pasta with it doesn't matter if it's organic. It's not, it doesn't matter what it is. It still is a processed food. And I like your idea of, you're talking about being thoughtful, being mindful about eating. And that's a huge step, because if you go to that trouble, then you're actually focusing on things. And so, there is a high likelihood that you're not going to be sick or have problems, because you're going to that extra step of thinking about it, and you can eat certain foods. And I like the term fresh, local, seasonal. That's from Gary Fettke, the Australian orthopedic surgeon guy. He's great guy, but he just fresh, local, seasonal. If you eat fresh, local, seasonal, you're there. And he also says, how do we feed the world? We don't need to think about feeding the world. You need to feed your community. If you feed your community, by default, you feed the world. Right? Like, if everyone's eating, and he's by eating fresh, local, seasonal, by being mindful of this, and if every community fed themselves, then we would by default feed the world. Yeah. So yes, we
concept for me. It's like, for instance, when I fly into a city, and I was just in LA recently, and I come in and I see houses and buildings for an infinite amount of place I can see, right? When it makes sense, like even in Austin, I think we're pushing it, but I go out to like a rural community, like where we just got our farm on Bastrop, and there's like, 20,000, 40,000 people. Like, okay, I get how you could do that. But when you're talking about a city of 4, 7, 8, 10, 11 million people, is that even possible to eat local? I mean, this is sort of like
well, yeah. No, that's a good question, because people also ask me, can we feed the world? Like, what if you're animal based, like, can we do it? And that's a lot bigger question. But for cities, I mean, we can get a lot of foods from local, just is a bigger local. I mean, there's farm. I go to the farmer's market and I know these farmers, and they're an hour from LA, right? It's not the end of the world to drive an hour, and they'll drive it in for you. and yes, it would be hard to get the entire LA to eat from the farmer's market, but it's not going to happen overnight. And I think if people eat fresh, local, seasonal, that just means basically unprocessed foods that are in season. We're not shipping things in from across the world. So, you can't eat a banana in certain times of the year, but within, a few 100 miles of LA, we can get all the fresh, local, seasonal food that we need. Yeah. I think.
And this is an ironic thing that a lot of people, let's say, who misconstrue the idea of meat being bad for the environment. And so instead of milk, I'm going to have Oatly. I'm going to have Oatly milk. I'm going to have oat milk. And don't just think about, they could go outside their place. And like you said, in Austin, there's tons of places I could actually walk like a block from here and grab beef from somewhere, or milk or whatever from a farm that's within like 30 miles, versus like the production of oat milk and all the fucked up ingredients that are inside of it, the canola oil, the processing of the oats, the packaging of it. And then you have this densely, like this really heavy thing that's then shipped across the world and then kept cold in refrigerators until you want to buy it. Like, if you actually do the math on the energy required to process, package, ship, refrigerate, and store the thing that you're thinking is better than what you can get from someone you can actually meet next to you, it's like, it's not even close.
It's not even close. And the bioavailability of nutrients is not even close. Or this
is like not even talking about like the...
And not even talking about it. Well, okay, this is great that you brought this up, because I was thinking about cell-based meat and, not just the Beyond Burgers. Of course, those are the same exact thing you just described, all the things that need to be put together to make them. But the lab-grown meat, people haven't really thought about this from a simple, logical, scientific engineering point of view, that they think this is our future. This is how it's going to be way more efficient. We're going to have all this stuff without the carbon footprint, all this stuff that they're pitching to us. I actually spoke at a food conference where all those companies came and did their talks and fancy presentations about this stuff. And I got to see it firsthand. And when I was in the audience, I was like, oh man, this is cool. Maybe I'm wrong. This is great. And then I thought about it for a quick second. We're basically talking about alchemy here.
Right.
You can't, there's a certain amount of energy that takes to grow a meat and get the amino acids. Like, how are you going to get the same amino acid profile and protein from a meat, in real meat, from fake meat?
Yeah. From nothing. It's not like we have a magic vat that takes energy from the sun and then converts it into whatever. It's like these nutrients then have to be mined from elsewhere. You can't just make up energy and nutrition.
I don't get how people don't realize this. It's a great con.
I mean, it is absolutely insane. Like, where do you think this stuff comes from? And I think that when you start really understanding where, like, even if you understand physics to a small degree, you should understand what's going on here, and that this is a literal impossibility.
Well, it was making them money, and it sounds great. And I mean, I admitted I bought into it for a brief period, but
it's alluring to think, oh yeah, we could have everything just sort of, we solve some of these problems or whatever. It's like it's an impossible thing. You can't do it. And like, maybe eventually, somewhere down the line, we will invent some machine that can extract and rearrange molecules and spit out exactly what we need. And like, I mean, I'm sort of also in the mind of, we think about this in as far as like a complex systems point of view. Mm-hmm. We do not understand anything about the human body. Relatively speaking, like, yeah, we understand some stuff, but we don't know most of anything. And so we're going to say, okay, we don't know anything about the human body really when it comes down to it. We're going to know exactly how to rearrange a cow or a ruminant or any other animal. So we understand, we don't understand humans, but we understand how to make meat in cows and everything that's in there and how it relates to each other. And then we're going to have that thing where, like, we have a complex system of a cow and a complex system of a human. You eat one of those things, and those two complex systems interact with each other. We have no idea how that really works, but we're going to make up one of them and then pretend like we know how then that works the next time. It's like, it's an insane concept to me, and just not understanding what we don't know.
Well, that's what humans do. I was recently thinking about where we went wrong. Like, how did we get in this mess? And that what you're talking about is this kind of grandiosity, or like delusions of grandeur, thinking that we can outsmart nature. right? This is a concept. Actually, Saladino, our mutual friend, just tweeted about it. I just saw that yesterday. It's the same thing I was saying. He's like, we can't outsmart nature. We think we've been eating a certain way forever, right? And now we think that we can just come up with these wacky foods and it's going to save us. But this is such a bigger thing, because this is why our healthcare system went bad, the medical system and the food system. So I've been thinking about this for months, is that technology saves us in every other realm, almost everything. The phone, it's like, it's amazing. You got a computer in your hand. The TVs get better each year. So many things, like acute injuries, like you break your leg, so many advancements, your teeth fell out, so many advancements. So technology has saved us in so many ways, but there's a fundamental part of nature that I think we can't override, is the basic human things, which are just nutrition and sleep. I don't think we're ever going to have a pill that you could just take and get 1 hour of sleep and it's like getting 8 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think there's certain fundamental things of nature. You need sunlight. I mean, I guess we have some ways to get some vitamin D without the sun, but you're not getting the full thing. I mean, there's nitric oxide that is created in your skin when you're in real sun. There's all these other things with real sun. So I think where we went wrong is we thought we could outsmart nature with medical system and food system, when it's just, we're going to take this pill and you're going to be able to cheat nature. There's no free lunches in nature. That you can't, the pill will never work. It can suppress cholesterol a little bit, or, maybe you can have a little bit better blood pressure because of something. But what you really need to do is do the lifestyle and change your diet. And that's so huge. So I was thinking on the even bigger picture, I try not to do all these little gimmicky phrases, but like I think this whole chronic disease obesity thing is almost inevitable because of human nature. And it's because of this grandeur thing, this grandeur that we could outsmart nature, gratification and greed. So the gratification part is immediate gratification. Everyone knows about, the old marshmallow Stanford experiment and the kids, who like got the 2 marshmallows later, or you get 1 marshmallow now. It's humans. So many people are just into this immediate gratification, mouth pleasure. I want this good food. It's like it's hardwired into us because of our ancient genes and how things were scarce, and we needed dense calories, and we found honey and it was good, and we're going to eat a pint of honey. But in the modern day, everyone, especially our society, is shifting to just gratification. It's easy, cheap, fast, delicious. Cheap, fast, delicious. This is a concept we're putting out in the film as well. Everyone is obsessed with cheap, fast, delicious. And it's ruining us, because those are just unhealthy. And you can work around it a little. And I mean, I can make a burger patty pretty quickly and eat it, and a couple eggs, and I can have a cheap, fast, and delicious meal. But not everyone knows that. And then the last thing is greed. This is just how the things work. We got some mistakes. We had some mistakes in nutrition science. There's a whole Ansel Keys stories. There's all these things, how we thought saturated fat was bad. We thought cholesterol was bad. And then what happens? The food industry takes over, and then they jump and they make their processed foods, and they make money, and all the processed foods have the highest profit margin, and all the whole foods don't have a profit margin. I have a company called Nose to Tail. I'm trying to sell meat. I'm not making any money. Like, I'm still not making any money because there's no profit margin in whole foods. You can't just make a ton of money selling meat. It takes a lot to make that meat. So this greed is kind of it's what always happens, is the big companies take over. They have their interests. I mean, they're beholden to their shareholders to make money. And so if you combine that all, like, this is just human nature. Human nature is greed. Human nature is that gratification. And human nature is this grandeur that we think we can outsmart nature. And that's where we went wrong. And I don't know how it could have not gone this way, where 88% of people are metabolically damaged and all the rest.
Yeah. I mean, people are just really acting evolutionarily appropriate when it comes down to it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I listened to you and Paul on the podcast talking about the mismatch diseases. Like, I've read these books too. What is it? Story of the Human Body. Like you and I know that all the problems, everyone listening and knows our modern environment doesn't match our ancient genes. And this is where all the modern disease comes from. But like you made a good point too, is that we are just living in our ancestral patterns. And this is the human nature, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's like sort of ironic that we need to think outside and escape those evolutionary sort of biases to be able to get the things that evolution needs.
It is.
That's silly.
Well, it's like we're screwed because of the modern environment, but it's like all the advances that are so great that have made us so amazing and advanced and efficient and all this great tech is screwing us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was like, and this is where I think that the future of hopefully a lot of entrepreneurs will go is like realizing where we are and like trying to use technology to help out. For example, I was chatting with Matteo of 8 Sleep previously today, and he, so I don't know if you know about 8 Sleep. No. Somebody that basically it's like, you know, chili pad concept where it has a whole mattress and it like takes all this data, but ultimately like creates this temperature curve at night to mimic what we should be getting. You're not going to have much success right now telling people to go sleep outside where they are. Mm-hmm. It's just not going to happen. So like, how do we get technology to do that? And even with food right now, like I think that you probably noticed it with Nose Tail. I don't know exactly what you guys' supply chain looks like, but distribution right now is like, we don't have a solution for that really. It's like, it's a nightmare. And I think that the internet and selling stuff online helped a lot for distribution and discovery of products. But ultimately, like we're going to need technology to fix a lot of these problems. And even if it's like getting people flicker-free light bulbs that block or emit certain wavelengths, like that's better. And like, I think that it's going to start progressing things. But ultimately, like I used to think that sort of, everyone's just going to sort of return to rural communities and like live this utopia and sort of return to working on the land. So like, I don't know if you've read Unsettling of America by Wendell Berry. Phenomenal book. After that, I was like, okay, this is like, we need to get everybody to be a farmer and all that stuff. And reality set in. And I went on Twitter. I was like, oh yeah, people are not going to do that. And so now it's about thinking about how can we guide people towards that. And I think that you make a really good point around, are they ready? Are people ready to make this shift? And I guess like, it's really tough to like right now, I almost think it's like a binary thing. Like you either think for yourself or you don't. And like, is that something that we can even instill in somebody, is asking the questions for themselves and not taking blanket authority statements. And you said before that government doesn't know what they're talking about. And their nutritional guidelines are brutal. Doctors are not trained well. Their stuff is all garbage from big food and big pharma. And so when people go and look for sources, and there's people like me and you putting out information, but all doctors everywhere and the government and everybody else says that saturated fat is going to kill them and X, Y, and Z sort of ridiculous health claims, how do they start looking at things themselves, trusting people like us, like making that switch to being sort of anti-establishment in some ways, and then get motivated to make changes on their own? Like that's to me such a hurdle. And I haven't found a good way to get people sort of transitioned over. So if you have one, let me know and I'll.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if there is one. I mean, I'm just trying to put up the film. And then I think there's always the inciting incident type of thing, right? My inciting incident was my parents and Primal Blueprint, right? And then that led me down the path. So maybe the Food Lies film can be that for someone. And yeah, you're basically talking about critical thinking skills, right? And I think our school system is not set up for that. And there's entire books about that, actually, that it was sort of designed in a bad way. And luckily, I think I went to grade school in Hawaii. Obama went there. I think my mom was his teacher, math teacher. She taught there forever. Yeah, great school. But they instill critical thinking, and I think it really served me because a lot of people I know, that friends from there, that they're doing interesting things. They think for themselves, and so yeah. I mean, sometimes you have to unlearn. What you've been taught. It's just like the doctors. It's hard. It's hard to unlearn that. It hurts, right? It's like, so all my medical school's wrong, or like I'm the doctor. Why this random engineer guy who has some podcast is telling me, otherwise I'm the doctor.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you're right about sort of the sort of spark that lights the match. People need to have an event, and whether that's losing a family member or having a kid or being made fun of because you're overweight or whatever. I mean, that's sort of my thing when I was younger. I was like, I was super overweight, eating a bunch of crap, was sick of being bullied. And I was like, okay, this is enough's enough. And like then started looking into things when I was like 12. And I actually drew this out last night, thinking about this whole problem. And I think that it's like you have like the artificial environment makes sick people. Like artificial environment creates fake food makes sick people. And then you have, after that, you have sort of an initial thing that then puts them on a journey to eventually leading to eating real food, figuring out their health, like sort of all these concepts that we're talking about. Like once you start digging and you're curious and you're a curious person, and you just keep digging, you sort of land to these concepts. We know so many people that have done the same exact thing and landed at the same exact spot. It's not a coincidence. Yeah. And so sometimes from that first incident to getting to like eating local food, fresh, local, seasonal, these concepts, that sometimes is instantaneous. I've noticed maybe only about like 5% of people max are on that. Like it's all or nothing. And they're just like, oh, okay, now I should just do this. And like everything's there. Otherwise, it's like this big, curvy, weird, meandering line where people stumble and trip and fall and learn and all this different type of stuff. And like, that's where, you know, Perfect Keto, for example, like we sell packaged food. I am just on here saying, don't eat packaged food, eat real food only, eat local food. But it's like some people, they're on this bridge, and sometimes it takes longer to get them where they're at. Like I was 12 when I first started thinking about this stuff. I did not just start asking my parents to buy like wild game that was locally sourced. You know what I mean? Like some people have different paths to get there. But I think like creating different bridges for people and be able to be like, okay, we're going to sneak this in, educate on the back end. But like, I'm almost thinking like, should we just use marketing to educate people around these events? Like, how do we find more people who are like curious and wanting to learn more about their health? I've not found really good ways to like stimulate that initial spark that goes, oh, maybe I should think about this. So it means it's a really challenging thing to.
Yeah. I mean, we're spending some time in the beginning of the film, just letting people know. I mentioned it earlier that a lot of people don't even understand how important their diet is to their health. They think, oh, it's just about exercising. That's all it is. You know, if I just eat a little bit less and I exercise, that's it. That's, you know, they don't understand the food choice is what matters most. And the diet is what matters, is the biggest factor in health. I think most people in our little world think that. But
what do you think as far as like if you were to rough percentage, like the importance of nutrition versus anything else?
I mean, if you factor in windows of eating, like when you're eating too, I think it's 70%. We're talking about not eating all the time and eating the proper nutrition in, you know, the right timing, that I think it's up to 70%, maybe more.
Yeah, I'd agree. Around the range is just like we were talking about before with the lab ground meat. It's literally what you're made of. You can have a good experience and have proper neurochemistry or cells, or not have chronic disease, to even say you can sleep well or not be stressed or have better relationships or move well. Like you need the best raw materials to start with.
Foundation. And also I think this because I've interviewed so many great doctors that have had patients with amazing transformations who were, say, in a wheelchair, or say had no budget for anything. They were on food stamps and they made these changes, and it was not about going to the gym. They're in a wheelchair or they have no money to go to a gym.
Yeah. So, or like people like, I think Matt Walker talks about sleep's the most important thing over nutrition. So like that. It's like, well, technically if you didn't eat anything, you would not exist. So.
And then, how to get good sleep. Yeah. Like set yourself up. A lot of people have bad sleep because they have poor nutrition. And I do think sleep is huge. I definitely, I read his book and also just about Alzheimer's that, it's when my mom had, I'm getting some sleep, I'm getting my 8 hours every night. And yes, I believe in sleep.
Cool. Yeah. So the film, so you said you changed a little bit of what's going on over the last couple of months. Like what has shifted about it?
Well, I mean, really, I've changed a lot over the years. Like I said, I kind of went down, I've made it more broad. I think you need to be more accepting of all people, meet people where they're at, not be biased. Part of your questions were around like, how do we get people to even start thinking about this? And how do we reach out to them? Like, what is this inciting incident? And I think part of it is coming from a place that's doesn't sound super talking down to them or biased or anything, right? So if I made another keto film, Magic Pill, great guy, Pete Evans made a film and it was like a keto film and it was on Netflix and Magic Pill was good, but it was like a keto film.
Yeah.
And so I think what we need to do is just let's just look at this from the highest level and try to not be in a camp And I think that's a more effective way to reach people. And that's sort of been over the 3 years have been going down that path and, straying away from any sort of plan, even if it is the plan that I believe in, because I don't want to lose people. And then just more recently, it's just, I don't know. I mean, we're going over every word of this thing, just really getting into, we're trying to get 1,000 concepts out in maybe 100 minutes. And it's really hard.
Yeah, I can only imagine. When you have a release date set for it right now?
No. We keep having them, and then it doesn't work out. And COVID, we were scheduled to go to Africa, so I'm waiting for the borders to open. I'm going to hang out with some tribes, and there's this great woman out there who's nutrition genius and is going to show me around. And we're also waiting for the Smithsonian, the Museum of Natural History, to open. We're going to film with a great anthropologist there. And so, yeah, it's just, I mean, it'll be before next spring.
Okay. I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah.
And what is your typical nutrition looking like right now? I know you sort of like pushed hard to more of the carnivore-ish side, but where have you landed? Like, what are your thoughts on that right now?
Yeah. Well, that actually kind of goes along with the film. Is I like to look at all things combined, look at all the different lines of evidence, right? We can look at the human evolution and our past. We can look at modern science and everything in between. We look at anecdotal stories. We can look at, I told you, I work with a doctor and we work with patients and I see what works with them. Putting it all together is kind of where I've landed on that thing I call the sapien diet. It's a sapien way of eating, whatever it is. It's just a human species appropriate diet. It's a framework. And so there's many variations of it. It's based on whole foods and not eating all the time and focusing on nutrient density and that happens to be greater in animal foods, right? So if you look at bioavailability, nutrient density, most people listening kind of know that's in the animal kingdom, but it also doesn't mean you have to eat carnivore. Like I've never been a fan of just like the hardcore carnivore world because I just don't think it's evolutionary appropriate. I don't think we went longer than, 9 months on 100% animal foods, and that people throughout history, we study these people and they go to great lengths to get some plant foods, even if they are in the Arctic and they're Inuit, and they'll go to great lengths to get some of these plant foods, and they'll eat the contents of stomachs or they'll trade for things, and just a lot of interesting stuff. So I guess this is a meandering way to say I eat a animal-based diet, maybe 80 to 90% animal foods, fermented vegetables, and some low sugar fruits. And I eat twice a day. And I think that's just what works for me and what probably would work for a lot of people. And I've put a lot of people on that plan as sort of a health coach and working with my, doctor who's like the actual, health practitioner that helps them along. And it seems to always work. It doesn't mean it works for it doesn't mean everyone has to do it, but it seems to always work. Young, old, all different races, all different kinds of people. And I just think that, that kind of condensed eating window. I mean, people know the science by now, that not spending time in the fasted state is good. You don't always want to be in the fed state. So we want to have a more condensed eating window. And I think there's just more good nutrients from animal foods, but then I do see the value in variety and in just different nutrients. Like, I mean, sauerkraut, kimchi, like these fermented vegetables, they have some vitamin C, they have probiotics, whatever you think about that. I mean, Saladino will tell you that you don't need them, but I'm not mad at them. Right. And I think it's great. I eat onions and mushrooms along with my steaks. I eat fish, I eat oysters, I eat liver, I eat all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned his tweet yesterday of saying, I think it was something like, you can't fool nature. Here's what we've been doing for all of history: eating animal products, nose to tail, sunshine, relationships, sleep, etc. And I try to troll him on there and say, and also eating plants. And I think that this is not talking down Paul. He's one of my really good friends. And I told him that my goal before the end of the year is to get him to promote plants at least once. So I'm working on that. But I mean, I think that if you really look at it, we're talking about before, it's confusing now to eat real foods, whole foods, even stuff that's local and seasonal. You can get into this weird thing where what we would have eaten, the variety of it, especially in plants, like how we've selected plants over many, many, many years to be these big fruit bearing things or stuff that's not bitter so we can consume it easier. Just the availability of what is historically appropriate for a human with plants is much, much harder than with animals. I think that with animals, it's like very easy with a ruminant, for example, to eat what we would have eaten 100,000 years ago. It's a little bit different, I think, when you get into chickens and pork, like poultry in general. It's like where a lot of the modern stuff is 20% roughly PUFA when it should be like 1-2%, 3%. So even with animal products, it can be a little tricky, like some fish, same thing. But in general, like to eat an appropriate plant-based diet, let alone plants on the side of an animal-based diet, from what we should have had is actually extremely hard, especially if you go to a grocery store and you're not getting stuff at farmers markets and you're going to like a Whole Foods who has to source the same 15 vegetables for the entire country. You're growing things at scale. You're using breeds and plants that can be grown at scale and harvested at scale, and then you're eating them. Like it's just like there is a disconnect there. I think that there's some merit to the sort of anti-plant movement from that perspective. But once you start thinking a little bit more and being a little more intentional around seasonality, especially with plant food and variety, I think that you start solving a lot of those problems.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe people should be more mindful of their plant food intake and understand. We have this other little phrase thing for the film: small, scattered, and seasonal. Like plant foods used to be small, scattered, and seasonal. Like they weren't all around. They were small as in, yes, like bitter. They weren't like our fruit today. They were scattered. It's not like we had orchards just sitting there, and they're seasonal. We didn't always have them. So people should, if they kind of understand this stuff, maybe we need to think about the toxicity of eating the same plant every day for a year, and that there are methods that our ancestors used to get rid of some of these anti-nutrients, or just, that's why I like fermented foods. It does a lot. It gets rid of a lot of the bad things and a lot of the sugars as well. So just being more mindful about the plant foods is probably a good message. But again, I don't think we need to be Paul.
Yeah, 100%. So have you ever tried like a full plant-based diet, or like closer, like the flip of what you're doing now?
That's what I was doing in my 20s. I wouldn't call it plant-based, but I mean, by calories, it was plant-based. So also I did a podcast with a good dentist, like a sort of foundation, not foundational, functional medicine sort of oriented, root cause medicine type of dentist, and really into Weston Price stuff. I love Weston Price, but he found that, So the only time I had cavities my whole life was when I was in college in my 20s, eating more plant-based foods. It was very nutrient poor foods, packaged foods. And that's the only time I've ever had cavities. Now I go to the dentist and they're saying, "What are you doing here?" They like kick me out. Like, you don't need to see us. And so throughout my 20s, when I should have been in great shape, I was making all my own foods, having lean chicken and plenty of plants and, healthy, supposedly healthy, rice. I grew up in Hawaii, eat a lot of rice. I'd make, rice dishes with lean meat. And and it was horrible. I was inflamed. I was I was like puffy looking, and my health sucked.
Do you still eat rice now?
No, not really. So my thing is on the weekends, I have the sort of, I guess, ability to go off plan if I want to join a social occasion and then come right back on. So, and I told this to Paul, who we keep bringing up, because he just couldn't understand why I, eat the way I did or all this type of stuff. I'm like, well, I keep a certain gut bacteria alive so that I can eat. I am anti-fragile. I can eat different things, and I'll eat some rice. I'm not gonna. I don't buy it for myself and keep it at home. Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Ruscio and I don't know if you know Michael Ruscio.
Yeah.
Him and I tag team on Paul quite a lot and tell him that if you eat rice and like you're breaking down, like you can't, like you're not a resilient human. Like you are very at risk of dying.
That's a good point. Exactly. Yeah.
You like humans are omnivores. They should be able to tolerate a lot of stuff. Doesn't mean you have to eat it every single day. But yeah, just know that he's toying around with rice more. I've added it in a little bit more this year and feel pretty good eating it. And it has like, I've noticed some rices, no impact blood sugar. Other ones just crush me. And so I've been using levels to, I think, I don't know if you use them or NutriSense or whatever, but
yeah, I had one for a little bit from NutriSense. Yeah.
Using the CGM and just seeing like, okay, which of these foods do I respond better to? And like timing of them as well is pretty important as well. So it's been interesting just like play around some of these foods that I've been and just questioning my own thinking around it. And just thinking like, okay, if I can't go out and acquire carbohydrates right now very easily because I'm not like growing all my own food, farmers market's only open Wednesday and Saturday, like, is it okay to eat white rice for me? Like having these compromises, like, okay, we say local, eat seasonal, whatever. Like, where do you sort of blur this line and come up with a plan that works best for you for what you want out of life?
I mean, I have no problem with that. I've seen a lot of success with sort of like targeted carbs too. Yeah. You know, people eating around their workout, and I mean, kind of talking about like a vertical diet, maybe like Stan Efferding's sort of thing with the rice. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think people need to be dogmatic about things like that, and then and just test them out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what most people don't do is reassess their sort of like views and opinions, and even like, okay, I tested this and it worked for me 3 years ago. Okay, well, does that fit what your goals are now? Maybe they've changed. Maybe how you respond to food changes. Maybe your body's changed. Maybe your microbiome has changed, whatever. And so that's why I think that this is sort of like a never-ending thing. You know, once you sort of like prioritize, like, okay, nutrients, it's like it's going to create a certain bucket, but then there's a lot of levers to tweak and pull after that initial sort of like set point. But then, yeah, things may change. Who knows?
Well, you know, it got me thinking. You asked me like how I eat. I have this idea of like a longevity diet, and let me know what you think. But in those 2 meals, I think it is a bit of this version of targeted carbs around the workout. And I think, you know, there's all these discussions of mTOR and IGF-1, and you're like, oh, these vegans are like, oh, if you eat meat, you're going to be like raising these things, and it's bad for longevity. And well, you know, if you're constantly eating, you're constantly raising those things too, and your insulin, right? So my idea lately is to eat. I'm in longevity mode most of the day, right? So it starts by getting a good night's sleep. Then I'm not eating until lunch. You know, it's like 1:30 p.m. Then I'm going to eat sort of like a keto macro meal, right? I'm eating like eggs and bacon maybe and avocado and stuff like that. So I'm going to stay in ketosis for the day. Then I'm going to work out, say 7:30 p.m., do a brief, intense workout. I say eat densely, move intensely. It's the opposite. It's almost the opposite of eat less, move more. Eat less, move more means nothing. And eat densely, move intensely actually lets you know what to do. You eat nutrient dense foods and move intensely. I think sprinting and lifting weights and stuff like that is great. Really, this is some like Dr. Ted Naiman stuff. You know, we're really on the same page. But yeah, man, I do like 17-minute workouts. I'm in growth mode. I'm singing until my muscles get bigger. And then after that, I'm eating maybe more protein. I'm not trying to stay in ketosis. I've never measured ketones actually. I'm going to overeat protein. Maybe I'm going to maybe have some gluconeogenesis. Maybe I'll have some carbs. Maybe I will have some rice, you know, because this is my growth mode. And then I'm going to go back to longevity mode. So for me, it makes a lot of sense to kind of live like that, where you want to balance. These bodybuilder guys aren't living forever. You know, they want to get giant. That's not necessarily good for longevity, but the opposite is very bad for longevity, being weak and having no muscle mass. So I think this thing I do is my 2 meals a day with my workout, and also, you know, go out and get some sun and read during the middle of the day, and the good sleep, and, you know, sort of this longevity mode, growth mode. That's sort of my solution to everything of just how do I balance these growth factors and then the longevity factors. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all fits and makes a lot of sense. I think that people generally, whenever you see your side like being so dogmatic, it's like either this or that. There's always some sweet spot in the middle. Mm-hmm. You look at that for everything. You know, I think that when you look at things that are normal and natural, that's good. When you look at things that are fake, you can say, like, okay, no amount of this is good. Like, for instance, like alcohol is fine. Like most people try to say it's like a health food nowadays, but it's a neurotoxin, and it's not. It's not like I'm abstaining 100% of the time. I drink sometimes, but it is not like a drop is worse for you than 0 drops. And so I think that when you look at real things with food and training and like moving your body, like all these things are normal. Like you said, you don't want to be a bodybuilder, crazy, and like always in growth mode, but you also don't want to be weak and frail and emaciated. And so it's like, what strategies do those employ? And I don't know what exactly your workouts look like, but I mean, this is like one interesting thing I haven't chatted with Ted about, but his concept of his like workouts, where it's basically just doing like a couple of movements really intensely, I think is sort of the same thing we were talking about before around the resilience of your body to handle certain foods. I think that this puts you in a, like you're basically optimizing for only one thing when it comes to biomechanics and workout. And I guess it's just like my background being like my doctorate degree in this stuff is like very focused on like, what are we, like, how is the body moving? What are we getting out of it? What movements are we going to want to do in 70 years or when we're 70 or when we're 80? And I think we're sort of missing a lot around movement patterns, joint function, joint overuse, cardio capacity, things like that, when we're just like doing one sort of like do push-ups until you can't every day. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's like most people, I would say that's if your goal is to, you know, get certain lactic acid thresholds and like build muscle, like create a hormone stimulus, sure, you can do that. But in general, even when I think about the patients that I have in my clinic, you have people who are at a computer all day long, reaching forward. Their pecs are already short in position. Like them mashing their pecs and like strengthening them more and more every day is going to lead to way poor upper back and shoulder mechanics, which is going to lead to actually a compressed torso, which leads to much poorer organ function because all your organs are smashed to each other.
Like this.
Yeah. And so there's just like a lot with movement that I think that I have a little bit different perspective on as it goes towards like longevity rather than just like intense, like simple body weights are the best. And I think that
I love that. Yeah.
Ultimately, like that comes down a lot to, again, like some of the things that I would recommend are a little bit push back on the paleo community who are like the purists. And they're like, well, we wouldn't use these type of weights, or like everything should be done with your body because cavemen didn't have this or whatever. And the problem is that if you look around our environment as far as it goes in movement, we think that in our environment for like sleep and light in nutrition is bad. Our movement environment is fucking brutal. And we are subjected to it 24 hours a day, every single second. And so with nutrition, like you said, okay, you have 2 chances in a day to eat. So you have to make only 2 decisions in a day. Okay, I'm going to eat this meal and I'm going to eat this meal. When you're talking about movement and literally the way your body is shaped and how it functions, we have to make a decision every single second about the position your body's in and how that molds your tissues moving forward. And so that's why I think that a lot of these weird workouts and things that are like very different than just like, okay, we're like this way, we should squat. So we're going to just squat a bunch, or like we should, you know, we can push. I'm going to do a bunch of push-ups. Like we need to be a little more creative just because our environment is so artificial that we need to reverse a lot of these things. And like, you can't, like I can't flew back from, I was in Washington this weekend and I flew back and I was on a plane. I had no choice but to sit in the seat. Like there's a lot of things in life where like I can choose not to eat the plane food. I cannot choose to not sit in that seat. Mm-hmm. Otherwise I can't get on that flight. And so like there's things that you need to do to sort of reverse all the artificial environment with movement. But this is like a crazy nitpicking thing around just like,
oh no, I love that. I agree. And I do differ from Ted a lot. And I need to look into this a lot more. And I'm sure there's way more that I could be doing, but I don't do his workout. I do stuff. I mean, I have a 40-pound weight vest and I do dips and I have sprints, but I also play basketball. When we were allowed to play basketball, I play basketball every week. I beach volleyball all weekend. And, I try to mix it up. So I'm on the same page as you for sure. I think some people, they get caught up in or just in their habits too, right? They just want to do one thing. It's like, I do my push-ups.
Totally. And that's why like I do a lot of gymnastics training. And I do that because this is one of the things where basically you cannot progress if your movement environment is limiting you in any way. So like you need to function your body at max capacity to hold a handstand or to do certain moves. Like you have to have your rib cage to be able to open up. You have to have your thoracic spine. You have to have proper shoulder and like shoulder blade stability. And so this is like one of the ways of training that's like not low volume, like low stress, but there's not a lot of intensity on your nervous system. And I think that a lot of people generally lift weights or work out in a way that is really taxing their nervous system all the time. And if we look at historically, like I think more about that of like, how are we adapting to our like movement stimuli? And even doing a really intense body weight workout every day, like, yeah, you're not going to load it, but that intensity, like getting your heart rate to a certain point, like working till failure is still a stress in your nervous system. And so like I try to think about like choosing that specifically and like saving those for when I play basketball or when I play spike ball or sprinting or whatever. But yeah, I think that this conversation, I'm not saying like you work out any certain way at all. It's just like the conversation in general around, even we said, okay, 70% is nutrition. I think a lot of people then end up mastering that, but then their sort of like pie of what they should focus on. Once you get it nailed down with nutrition, now it's like, okay, what are the low hanging fruit? And most people are not having that conversation around movement in the same way. Sleep, yes, we have all these books about it, like even mattresses that auto-regulate it to your temperature. We have stress, we have like meditation, headspace, all this thing coming out. Like we don't have a lot thinking from the framework of what was our environment like before and what is it like now. And sort of there's like so much about movement and working out, but it's all bullshit. And everybody thinks like, oh, okay, working out is just good, but not the same sort of scrutiny of root cause, like you're talking about earlier, like overuse injuries and things like that. Like we're not looking at the musculoskeletal system as root cause, or like how should our bodies function and what does optimal look like, and like what prevents us from picking up our grandchildren when we're 90 years old, and then breaking that down into root causes. Like I don't see a lot of that going on. Very, very little in the movement space.
You're right. You're right. I'm going to have to get out to Austin and do some of these gymnastic workouts with you. I grew up pole vaulting too. Somehow I got recruited to pole vault as one of my high school sports. And we did a lot of gymnastics training, and that stuff is hard, and gymnasts are jacked. And yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not good, nor am I jacked, but it's good training. Like it's like, I don't know. I like a lot of, but yeah, come down whenever and we'll get you spun up here. Yeah, come join the crew, man. We're building a lot of like-minded people down here. Paul and I already open an invitation to anybody who listens to that podcast. And so set another invitation out here and try to convince you. We'll come down for a weekend. We'll show you around, and then we'll make our formal pitch.
Be sold.
I think I know like 15 people since COVID hit that have moved out of larger cities that are coming here.
I mean, I was thinking about it even before that, but I've been thinking about it even more since. And I might come out in October. I mean, I love it.
Here. All right, brother. Well, thanks for the chat. I think that we could go on probably forever, but probably good. Where can people find all the projects that you're working on?
Sapien.org is a main place. Sapien.org leads to everything else, movies, Food Lies, and all my social media is just Food Lies. If you just search for Food Lies on YouTube or Instagram or Twitter, whatever, Facebook, I'll be there. And then nosetotale.org. That's it.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Good stuff.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research in books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing, and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.